Hi there. Solving climate change is the single biggest society opportunity on the planet today, but it's currently masked in a crisis. And there's things that everyone here can do to grasp that big opportunity and profit from it at the same time. That's why we're here. So I'm going to combine climate change and optimism in the same talk. And I'm going to start with an island. Hopefully, when we are talking about the world we want to live in, we think maybe it's an island like this is part of that world. If it's maybe for a few days in our year that we can go there, or if you've survived the Lithuanian and Scottish winter, you might think of moving there. But this is part of the world that we want to live in, we think. This, however, is a picture of the same island just round the corner. Islands are actually a really interesting way to see the picture of the crisis as well as the opportunity. Islands are typically importing fossil fuels from long distances, diesels coming in from long distances. They're hemorrhaging their hard currency, their hard-earned tourist dollars on importing diesel. And what that does is a number of different things. GDP, the Cook Islands is not alone. 30% of their GDP is used importing fossil fuels. Electricity prices, in many, many islands, it's over 40 cents a kilowatt hour. That's more than 4 times what the normal country pays. And then on volatility, fossil fuels are volatile and the prices keep on rising. But what about the Bahamas? In the same time that the price of oil went up 23%, Bahamas Electricity Corp's fuel charge went up 170% in the same time. So when these guys are importing fossil fuels, they're also, who's going to suffer first and who's going to suffer worst? It's the islands. Worldwide, it's just as bad. Worldwide, 9 out of, you've heard some of these stats before, but 9 out of 10 of the hottest years ever are in the last decade. The impacts of this climate change are obvious, from the tragedy of the Philippines and other low-lying islands, all the way through to the Arctic poles, and then even very close to home in some of the most developed countries, Superstorm Sandy and Somerset. So the impacts are clear, and the costs are big. Over 1.5% of GDP world GDP has already been attributed to climate change, forecast to grow to over 3% by 2030. But again, just like the island example, 11% is the figure that's attributed to the least developed countries suffering from climate change. 11% hit of their GDP between now and 2030. So the conclusion, unless you're a member of the Flat Earth Society here today, the conclusion is really obvious, that actually we are causing this. We are creating too much of a heat-trapping gas called CO2, and the impacts are being felt right now, and they are only going to get worse. So what are we going to do about it? Well, firstly, who am I to stand here talking to you about this climate change challenge and opportunity? Basically, I'm from the Carbon War Room, but I spent 10 years of my life in the Virgin Group. Before that, 2 years with serious business training in McKinsey, and then less serious and entrepreneurial training in the Virgin Group, and then on for the last 5 years of my life to be working here with the Carbon War Room, basically focused on big climate change, carbon reductions in CO2 that make money and reduce carbon at the same time. So, and just before we get on to this number on the chart behind me, I just wanted to sort one thing for clear. It's not global warming we're talking about here. It is global step change climate craziness. So, in terms of that, when you start to look at the numbers, let's see what happens. 768 grams. That is the number of grams of CO2 it takes to generate $1 of GDP in the world today. So that's just one big number divided by the other. That's what you get. What do people here think needs to get to? Ask yourself, what figure does it need to get to for us to be sustainable? How much CO2 to create $1 of GDP? Give me a number. 20. I heard 20. 20 is close, but unfortunately, not close enough. The answer is 6 grams of CO2, and those are the volumetrically correct size of CO2 balls. So 6 grams of CO2 to produce $1 of GDP. This isn't a small course correction, a small shift in direction. This is huge. We have to really change direction. And then the other piece that we might also be daunted by, so we're daunted by the scale, we might also be daunted by the complexity. So, for instance, the biggest, most powerful companies in the world today, are state and corporate, are in charge of fossil fuels. The systems are all connected. Food, energy, water, and more, all connected. So, the good thing about it is, we didn't stop the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. There are plenty of stones still in the world today. So what's daunting and complex, let's move on. Let's see what's the actual opportunity here. So with apologies to my former employer and a salute to my former employer, McKinsey, this is a vastly oversimplified McKinsey cost curve. But it is climate change on one graph. On the x-axis is how many tons of CO2 we need to get rid of today as a world, is stop emitting that as a planet. And then on the y-axis is the cost of taking that CO2 out of the atmosphere. So things that are very expensive, for instance, are in red. That might be stopping carbon capture from coal plants. That might be paying a less developed country not to chop down their trees. Expensive, but worthwhile and need to be done. But then the stuff on the left-hand side is a strip that gets you along the cost curve. It stops you emitting CO2, but it's actually negative cost or very, very cheap. So actually, you can make a profit and mitigate carbon at the same time. So that's, if we turn that around, that actually there's an opportunity from the size of scale, because it actually chops down into profitable opportunities. The other piece is, what if it's actually, the complexity is also something that makes us think about the opportunity too. For instance, let's all realize that it's not the governments, those representatives that can't come to an agreement in Copenhagen, Cancun, Bonn, Durban, etc., that actually it's businesses and entrepreneurs and the consumers that buy from them. That's where the power lies. Policy is a necessary but insufficient condition to get things done, and technology is never the bottleneck. It's out there already. It's how do you get the business moving? So from going from what looks like a daunting and in size and complexity challenge, actually there's a huge opportunity here. So what I mean by that is then, if we're correct on that at the top level, then all we really need to do is go into this left side of the cost curve and go, well, where's the opportunities? Where's the money? Why hasn't it been done? Let's sort it now. And by going efficient, that's the first of the big buckets of massive opportunity. Go efficient. What do I mean by that? I mean use less of what is expensive. Getting more expensive is dirty, and it's harmful, and it's running out. That's what we should use less of. So let's take shipping as the first example. One of our projects, you look at the shipping industry. If you go behind the curtain of the shipping industry, there's something really interesting, inspiring, and in some cases terrifying going on all at the same time. There's only 100,000 ships on the world fleet transporting 95% of the world's goods. So most of the things that you are wearing, that are in your hands and pockets, that came by sea. But actually also, that is driven by the world economy, but it then also drives a major industry in its own right. As you can see from the graph there, only 100,000 ships is actually the 6th largest country in the world in terms of emissions. So 1 billion tons of CO2 in between Germany and Japan just by those vessels. And big can also sometimes mean dirty. So this is SOx, NOx, and PM, sulfur oxides, acid rain, things like that, pollutants that are bad for our health. One of the largest vessels in the world is 50 million cars worth of SOx. So only 15 of those largest ships in the world is the entire world stock of cars right now. So It's a big industry. It's the most efficient way already of getting goods from A to B. But there's a huge gap that we have to fill and actually can get going on. So the interesting thing is, sitting around the tables and sort of rolling your sleeves up with the shipping industry, there's two main market failures that are stopping them from getting what are brilliant technologies on the ships. Brilliant technologies, for instance, like paint. Just the best paint in the world is 5 times more expensive than the average paint, but will pay back in fuel terms in less than 10 months. Best propeller caps, more out there, wind going on to that. Basically, the interesting thing is there's 50, 60 technologies that could be applied to vessels today, and that could be $70 billion a year in wasted fuel. So why are these 50, 60 technologies not going on to the vessels of today if it could be saving fuel? And back into those meeting rooms. You roll up your sleeves with them, and they tell you there's 2 key market failures stopping this. 1, poor information. It's hard to tell a clean ship from a dirty ship, whether you're on the demand side and you want to only put your goods on the clean ship, or you're on a supply side and you've got brilliant ships and you want to nudge the competitors out the way and say how brilliant your ship is. Either way, the information is poor. Second one is split incentives. 70% of the fuel in the shipping industry is paid for by the cargo owner, not by the ship owner. So why would I, as a rational ship owner, fit all these bells and whistles onto my ship that saves fuel if somebody else gets the benefit? And because of the first market failure, nobody will really notice if I've done all that work anyway. So we're stuck. So how do we get these vessels on the ship? And that's where our project starts to go into action. We came up with great partners. We came up with a three-step plan, which we're in the middle of implementing. The first one is solve for the information. Let's do an A to G rating for every ship. That's how you buy a refrigerator. That's how you rent an apartment. Why can't people rent and trade on ships in a similar way? So we launched shippingefficiency.org in Cancun. You can tap in now in the world for free for everybody, the name of any vessel, and up pops the rating. The second one is on the demand side. Again, not policy necessarily needed here. Just nudge the people with massive fuel bills and say, why don't you stop using those red ones, the F's and G's, and start migrating up towards the A's and B's. You're going to save fuel by asking for them. And over 1 billion tons worth of commodities now, ships, or shippers rather, are now saying no F's and G's for me. They've made that move, and they're migrating up the scale. And some ports have just announced that they will incentivize the A's and B's. So there's this pincer movement on the shipping industry saying, geez, let's get ahead. It's now commercially worthwhile to do so. And then the third piece is the financing. What if you're a ship owner and you just can't afford to do the upgrades? Well, actually, borrowing some finance mechanisms from the building trade, for instance, means that new third-party capital can come in, money that just is chasing a good return, puts the money in, pays the technology firm goes on the ship for free, and then the shipper then gets the benefit of the fuel savings and pays the bank back. Lots of commercial opportunity all the way around that scheme. And the opportunities are really interesting for everyone there before we move on. It's the entrepreneurs, it's the inventors that have brilliant technologies but weren't going on the ships. It's the ship owners, it's everyone in the industry, and then it's the consumer because the cost will be less. So that's one side. That's the go efficient. The second side is the go renewable. That's use more of what's abundant, clean, not harmful, and getting cheaper over time. That also seems like a good idea, both commercially and environmentally. So let's go back to the island. Let's go back to the island where actually we're working now with island prime ministers and their governments and say, well, how can you get from here to there? Their green curve, which I showed you at the start, their green curve is massive. It's nearly all on the left because they're paying so much for electricity right now. But the failures are in how to get there. How do they get off the start line? How do they move? And so we're, again, working with great partners. We're gathering people around the world, pioneering governments with the best of the private sector, open-minded finance, and getting them all in the same room to point to the same direction. The other piece on that is also in terms of a competitive bid process. So take their internal vision, make it external and appealing to the private sector, and get the private sector to sharpen their pencils and give the best possible price for those island governments. So let's go back to this island with your newly filled mind of the go efficient, go renewable, brilliant opportunities that there now exists. You arrive on this island, and you probably arrive by an ultra high efficiency cruise ship. It might even have been powered by wind. It then lands and switches off because it can connect to shore power. And so it switches off its engines so that you get on the deck and the air is much cleaner because you're also getting into an electric tram or an electric taxi, and that's taking you to your hotel. And then in the hotel, it's been designed well, so you don't need to light places that are unnecessarily dark, and it's not cooling places that are effectively the outside world. And that's just you. You go to the country, and the country that you've just arrived in is actually doing this at a grid level. They've flipped from wind and solar, so renewable energy is powering this place. And when the wind blows and the sun shines, then everything is working well. There's, let's see, the electric vehicle that I just talked about is being charged. Aircon, the pool pumps, those are all working by that. And on aircon, if you're near to the sea, it might even be powered and pumped by the cold water that's beneath the sea. So all super efficient stuff. But then when the wind and the sun don't blow and shine, then what happens? Well, actually, you replace those dirty power stations, those diesel power stations, with high efficiency battery storage units. So they go where the power stations used to go. Waste to energy opportunity. You get the municipal solid waste, that smelly stuff that was down from the hotel, and you create an energy opportunity that is dispatchable. They can put the waste in when they need that power, when the wind is not blowing. And that might even solve the waste problem on the arriving cruise industry as well. So lots of things going on there. Oh, and then the other one. The cars. What happens if you overspec the batteries in the cars so that then when the wind doesn't blow, the cars with their big batteries and they go parking, that gives some power back to the grid. And all that can happen right now with no new policy and no new technology. And in the islands we're talking to, this makes economic sense right now as well. So that's the islands. And that's the future, and that's the opportunity. There's one big point here. It saves fortunes for the government. The country of Aruba, of which this is the picture, has already saved 80 million on their way, on the wind deployment, on their way to a 100% renewable goal that they pledged in Rio Plus 20. And then there's fortunes to be made on the entrepreneurial side as well. So this can be done, and it's a threefold win. Economic, it's environmental, and it's a massive social win as well. So that's the islands. Two dreams and a quick aside for you. On two dreams. One is on the UN. Imagine that island I've just talked about, and maybe the 10 others around them. They are sitting there at the UN as heads of state, and normally they're thumping the table going, you big countries, why are you doing this to me? You are basically allowing the sea level to rise, you're polluting with your ships passing my island. So instead of thumping the table and saying, stop that and start acting faster, they're saying, oh, would you also like to visit my country? And I'll show you how it's done right now. The other dream is, if I can just remember it, it'll come back to me. Yes, the other dream, going back to it, and that meant, go back a slide, to the divvy tree. And the divvy tree is one where you say, actually, this tree goes with the wind. And maybe this is the start, when you start turning islands around, that actually we start to work with nature and not against it. The divvy tree leans for a reason. Why don't we lean in for the reason as well? And so this was my little aside, that actually, that for those NIMBYs out there, NIMBY is not in my backyard, so it's okay to have wind and solar, just not near me. It doesn't even have to be nasty looking. It can be lovely looking. This is a proposed solar development. It's not actually happened yet, but it looks like seagrass. The solar panels are in the shape of leaves, and they light up beautifully at night. So these dreams can actually come true, and they can come true in the here and now. So what I've really been talking about is just two things. Two specific projects that we're working on, but really, they're two buckets of things, two buckets of huge opportunities. Go efficient, use less of all that harmful stuff that's getting more expensive. Go renewable, use more of what's abundant and is getting cheaper all the time. So I said I'd finish with what can everyone do here in the room. Let's start with the passionate experts, the NGOs, the academics, and the entrepreneurs. Where are they? Here. We've got a few. We've got a few. Well, so you're all obvious. You're very passionate about this stuff already. NGOs and academics, get out here and help those entrepreneurs that are doing this stuff. Clear the runways for them. Show them where to go. On the entrepreneurs, do what you're doing. Spot the gap. It's not always a technology gap. It might just be a business model gap. And look, entrepreneurs have an awful lot of fun as well if you unite them with the low-carbon island at the same time. See the smiles. What does this remind me of? Corporates, governments, policymakers, financiers. Are you in the room? Hands up. No? A couple of them here as well. So corporates. The herd is interesting. Pick where you are on the herd, because if you're the lead buffalo, then you're going to make some money. If you're mid-pack, you might be okay, but watch if you're at the back. Financiers, finance this stuff, and don't get stranded with assets that are actually liabilities, because those fossil fuel companies can't even burn the stuff that's on what is currently called an asset. And policymakers, it's as simple but as hard as getting out the way and leveling the playing field and making sure it is level and you've cleared the runway for them too. So, in finishing, I've got 2 questions and a very quick thought. 2 questions. First one, are you doing enough with what you have and what you know now? And the second question is a personal one for all of us, and me too. I'm 40, I've got a 1-year-old, and I've got a lovely, very pregnant wife at home. When you go there and you're sitting there with your grandchildren on your knee, and they've just studied history at school about this time, and they ask you, what did you do when everyone started to know? What did you do when you knew? Those are the 2 questions I think we should ask ourselves. And the parting thought is, there is no planet B. We don't have an extra planet to just go to when we run out of this one. So we have to make the time, we don't have much time either. We have to make good use of this time. Use the time of what we got. And on topic of time, I notice I'm slightly over. Thank you very much for yours.